You're tuning in to Creepy Time, where we bring you chilling creepy stories and eerie urban legends every day at 6 p.m. To support Creepy Time, please don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts in the comments so we can discuss the story together. Now, let's dive into today's tale. Rules for rescue work in deep forests. The sun hovered low above the ridges of the Appalachian Mountains, its amber light flickering through the dense treetops like warning beacons. John Myers cut the engine of his aging Ford Ranger, letting the hum fade into the sounds of forest and wind. Ahead, the Appalachian Search and Rescue Station stood squat and silent, its wooden siding weathered gray after years of neglect. The hand-painted sign above the porch read, "Green Hollow Search and Rescue Division." John hesitated before stepping out. 3 years ago, he left this life behind, but something about the old call the pull of the deep woods and the thrill of saving lives had drawn him back. That, and the letter he'd received last week. "We need experienced trackers. Missing person spike reported. Patterns unclear." He wasn't here for nostalgia. Pine needles crunched underfoot as he approached the porch. The familiar scent of damp moss and wood smoke hit him like an old memory. Standing there, he remembered the warnings told around campfires during his rookie days. Out here, the woods weren't just dark, they watched you. Inside the station, he found Sarah Thompson commanding as ever, short-cropped hair under a weather-beaten cap, clipboard in hand. Without a word, she handed him a sheet laminated in plastic. It wasn't a standard orientation. It was the rules. Rule 1. Never search for someone whose first or last name matches yours. Rule 2. If you spot a lone figure standing motionless, do not approach. Rule 3. If voices call from 3 or more directions simultaneously, retreat immediately. Rule 4. If you find belongings arranged in deliberate shapes, like crosses or spirals, report and withdraw. Rule 5. Trust your shadow. If it vanishes, you must too. John felt his stomach tighten. "These aren't campfire stories anymore," Sarah said quietly. He nodded. The rules were half fable, half protocol, and for the last 6 months, the number of missing people had spiked around Green Hollow. Hikers, hunters, campers, and rescuers. John signed the logbook. No turning back now. Sarah briefed him. A teenager named Luke Carter, 17 years old, missing for 2 nights after heading out to set trail cameras. His parents swore he knew the area. Last GPS ping placed him near Boulder Creek Deep inside restricted terrain. John took his pack and rifle. It wasn't for predators. Not the usual kind anyway. By the time he reached Boulder Creek, the light was draining from the sky. He checked his radio. Static. His gut told him to wait for backup, but his heart said otherwise. That's when he heard it, a boy's voice. Faint, but clear. "Help." He turned sharply. "Please help me." The voice came from 3 different directions at once. John froze. Rule 3. Realizing the trap, he stepped backward carefully, counting his breaths. He activated the emergency beacon on his vest, letting its red light pulse steadily. Then he heard Ida's soft shuffle behind him. Turning slowly, he saw a figure. A boy. Maybe Luke, standing just beyond the tree line. Silent, unmoving. John raised his flashlight, but the beam seemed swallowed by the mist gathering around the pines. His pulse thundered in his ears. He forced himself to speak. "Luke?" No answer. The boy didn't move, but his shape wasn't quite right. Too thin, too still. He remembered Rule 2. With discipline sharpened from years in uniform, John kept his flashlight low and backed away, step after deliberate step, resisting every primal urge to run. Back at base, Sarah reviewed the footage from John's body cam. The figure never appeared on the recording. Only John's ragged breathing and the voices calling his name from all directions. 3 weeks later, Luke Carter's body was found upstream, his pockets stuffed with stones, his shoes missing. Official report, accidental drowning. Unofficially, the local SAR teams had a name for that stretch of river, Echo Hollow. It was John's first mission back, and not his last. Stories like John's aren't fantasy. In rural Montana, searchers once heard a child's voice echoing through snow-covered canyons for hours only to find out the boy had died the night before. In Kentucky, veteran rescuers refused to enter certain valleys without backup, swearing they heard phantom calls mimicking their teammates. I've interviewed SAR teams from Oregon, Tennessee, and North Carolina who all admit off the record some disappearances don't make sense. Sometimes, one ranger told me quietly, the mountain returns them changed. Sometimes not at all. These rules? They're folklore polished into survival tactics. If you venture into deep wilderness or into any unknown, remember, not every call for help is real. Not every shadow means you're alone. Intuition and training are your lifeline. And sometimes survival means trusting what isn't there. Because not everything lost wants to be found. The next call came at 3:14 a.m. John Myers was already awake, sitting at his kitchen table in his small cabin just outside Green Hollow, staring into a cup of black coffee that had long since gone cold. The nightmares hadn't left him alone since the mission at Boulder Creek. The dispatcher's voice crackled over the emergency frequency. Priority 1, missing person confirmed. Teen male, reported last seen near Widow's Ridge. Responding unit requested. John didn't hesitate. By 4 a.m., he was pulling into the same dirt lot where 2 months earlier he'd sworn never to return. His flashlight cut through the dense Appalachian fog as he met with Sarah and 2 rookies fresh recruits, their faces pale in the pre-dawn chill. Sarah's expression told John everything. This wasn't routine. Name? John asked. Sarah glanced at her clipboard, then back at him, her voice tight. Name's Ethan Myers. John's stomach turned to stone. Could be coincidence, Sarah added quickly, though her voice lacked conviction. Parent confirmed the boy's age, 16. John shook his head slowly. He knew the protocol. Rule 1. He shouldn't search for someone with his name. But this wasn't just protocol anymore. This was personal. Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder. We'll send in Delta Team. You don't need to. I'll find him. John, I'll find him. Against better judgment, John keyed his radio, logged his entry, and began the hike up Widow's Ridge alone. He wasn't more than half a mile into the ascent when the fog thickened into a choking wall. Even the pines around him seemed to lean inward, branches creaking under invisible weight. And then he saw them. Footprints. Clear, fresh, pressed deep into the Muda teenage boy's boots. They led forward into the white haze. Each step John took felt like a betrayal of his training. His rational mind screamed to turn back. But his heartless, stubborn, grieving heart pushed him forward. Ethan, he shouted. Silence. Then, moments later, a reply. Weak, raspy. Dad? John froze. His heart cracked. But Ethan Myers wasn't his son. John had no children. Rule 1. He realized too late. Whatever was up here knew him, knew his weakness. Shadows moved in the fog ahead slow, circling, as if deciding how best to draw him in. And then he saw the boy. Slender frame, standing still about 20 feet ahead, just beyond where the fog turned silver in the moonlight. Ethan? John's voice cracked. The boy nodded. John took a step forward. Don't. The voice came from behind him. John spun, heart hammering. It was Ethan. Another Ethan. This version looked exhausted, drenched in river water, clothes torn, eyes hollow. "You're not my dad," the boy whispered. John's mind reeled. Two Ethans. One ahead, beckoning silently. One behind, warning him. The fog pulsed, breathing. Suddenly, memories flooded back, stories told in whispers by older rescuers about reflections in the Appalachians. Lost people who were copied not perfectly, but closely enough to lure rescuers deeper. Rule 1 wasn't about coincidence. It was about defense. John turned back toward the first Ethan, but the figure ahead had changed. Now it wore John's own face, and it was smiling. John staggered backward, heart racing, adrenaline spiking. "Dad," the real Ethan shouted behind him. "They're coming." He ran. John spun to follow, crashing through wet underbrush, low branches tearing at his arms, Ethan's ragged breaths just ahead. Every time John looked over his shoulder, his own smiling face watched from the mist. By the time they reached the creek bed, John's legs burned and his lungs heaved. Ethan collapsed by the water's edge, shaking. John knelt beside him. "You're real?" he choked out. The boy looked up at him with tears in his eyes. I don't know." John's blood ran cold. Far above them, the woods fell silent, and then came the whisper. Myers, not Ethan's voice, not John's. A third voice, calling his name from 3 directions at once. Rule 3. John grabbed Ethan and pulled him upright. "We need to move." But Ethan wasn't looking at him anymore. He was staring down at the creek. John followed his gaze and felt the last threads of logic slip from his mind. Their reflections in the water weren't moving. They were watching, smiling. In real SAR missions, it's not uncommon for missing persons to appear disoriented when found. Many swear they were never lost. Some even insist they were following rescuers' voices. Veteran teams know auditory hallucinations and disorientation are symptoms of hypothermia and panic. But how do you explain cases where trained rescuers themselves hear voices calling their names? Or when missing hikers return days later, unable to explain how they survived? Our own mind is the first frontier of survivaland, the first to betray us. Fear can rewire reality. That's why in rescue operations, strict adherence to protocol isn't bureaucracy, it's life support. Sometimes the thing calling your name isn't a person needing help. It's something that wants you to answer. John barely remembered the hike back down Widow's Ridge. He remembered holding Ethan's hand, feeling the boy tremble. He remembered the silence of the forest, broken only by the occasional whisper of his own name from nowhere. But he didn't remember the rescue chopper, or Sarah wrapping a blanket around his shoulders, or the moment the boy in his arms vanished into thin air. Ethan Myers had never existed, not officially. Sarah's report listed it as a false call. Local police confirmed no such missing boy had been reported, yet John could still feel Ethan's small, shaking hand in his. By morning, he was back in the station's infirmary, staring at the bandages on his scratched arms. That's when he noticed something impossible. His shadow wasn't following him, not properly. It moved half a second late, like it wasn't quite attached. At first he thought he was hallucinating, lack of sleep, trauma. But after 2 days, other team members noticed too. "Looks like your shadow's drunk," one rookie joked. John didn't laugh. Sarah confronted him that evening. "John, your case isn't unique. Not here." That's when she showed him the old files. Rescuers before him had suffered the same. Shadows breaking, reflections lagging, hearing their names called from multiple places at once. One entry chilled him. When your shadow stops, you stop. If it disappears, so should you. He asked Sarah what that meant. She said, quietly, "They're tracking you through it." For the next week, John tried to live normally. He ignored the way light bent unnaturally behind him. He ignored the way his mirror image sometimes didn't move when he did. But one night, after taking a long shower, he found wet footprints leading from the bathroom to his bed. He lived alone. Desperate, he drove 5 hours south to meet Travis Moore, a retired SAR veteran who'd once led the Green Hollow unit. Travis lived in isolation, off-grid, deep in the mountains near Asheville. When John arrived, Travis refused to open the door. Only when John shouted that his shadow wasn't moving right did the old man let him in. Travis didn't ask questions. He only said, "They marked you." Over the course of 2 hours, the old man explained what little he understood. In the Appalachians, there are things older than the trees. Things that mimic us not to blend in, but to get close enough to feed, to pull people from this world into wherever they go. The rules weren't warnings. They were survival instructions against something most refused to admit existed. Your shadow, Travis said, is your last defense. When they break it, they can follow you home. John asked what to do. Travis said, "Count yourself. Every time you wake up, every time you look in the mirror. If you see more than one of yourself, you're already too late." Before dawn, Travis gave John a parting warning. Don't answer when something calls your name. You'll teach it where to find you. John drove home in silence. But he didn't make it back. Sarah found his truck abandoned along Route 67 2 days later. Inside, the passenger seat was soaked, yet outside, there had been no rain for over a week. In the rearview mirror, Sarah noticed something that turned her blood cold. John's reflection wasn't alone. Behind him, in the mirror's edge, another version of his face smiled softly. In real search and rescue work, strange cases do happen. Footprints that lead in circles. Missing people who leave belongings arranged deliberately, as if signaling. Cases where no physical evidence matches a missing person's account upon return. These stories rarely make official reports. But off the record, many rescuers admit the mountains sometimes take and sometimes give back, altered. In life, as in the deep woods, you must learn when not to answer. Not every voice deserves a response. Not every reflection is your own. And when your instincts scream that something's wrong, trust them. Whether it's fear, intuition, or something older, we ignore it at our peril. Sarah Thompson hadn't slept in 3 days. Since finding John's truck abandoned on Route 67, she'd reviewed every inch of the rescue station's files, searching for a pattern. One thing was clear. Whatever was hunting her team didn't care about logic or evidence or human rules. It only cared about familiarity, familiar names, familiar faces, familiar weaknesses. The rules weren't enough anymore. At dawn, she gathered her remaining team. 8 people, down from 23 6 months earlier. She addressed them without ceremony. From today, no solo missions, no night searches, and no one responds to any voice calling their name unless visual contact is confirmed. No one argued. That afternoon, they received the next call. A family of campers' mother, father, and young daughter had gone missing near Dead Man's Trail, 30 miles north. Locals whispered about that trail. People hiked in and never came out. But Sarah's team had no choice. Rules or not, they had to search. Within 2 hours, Sarah and 4 others were moving through thick pine and heavy brush. Radios crackled constantly with static. GPS signals flickered in and out. It was like something blanketed the area with interference. And then it started again. Sarah heard her name. First once, then from behind, then from her left, then from all 3 directions at once. Her skin froze. Rule 3. But this time, She broke protocol because the voice calling her name was her mother's, dead 20 years. Sarah's legs buckled. She fought tears as the forest spun around her. Behind her, Rookie Mason was breathing fast. You hear that? Sarah tried to focus. Don't answer. Don't listen. But Mason already had. He was gone. Just like that. 1 second walking behind her. Next second, nothing but crushed pine needles where his boots had been. Sarah wanted to scream, but her training kicked in. She activated the emergency beacon, signaling for extraction. Minutes later, Mason's voice came softly from her radio. Help me. Sarah nearly answered. But she stopped, because Mason's voice was too calm, too steady. She shut the radio off and waited. By nightfall, only 3 of them made it back to the extraction point. Mason was never found. But that night, when Sarah finally returned to her small apartment above the ranger station, she saw muddy footprints leading from her front door to her bedroom. And the footprints weren't hers. In search and rescue communities, there are real protocols about auditory hallucinations. SAR guides are trained not to trust voices heard in deep woods, especially when disoriented. While officially explained as survival stress responses, too many SAR veterans privately admit hearing familiar voices in impossible places, often from people long dead. When facing the unknown, doubt is your defense. Familiarity can be the trap. Not every voice from your past wants you to follow. In the force store, in life, some calls must be ignored, even when it hurts. 3 weeks after Mason vanished, Sarah received a letter. Not an email, not a call. A hand-delivered envelope with no return address. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. It showed her standing in the Forstair current uniform, same equipment, but she didn't remember being there. Behind her, in the trees, stood Mason, and he was smiling. The photo wasn't old. She checked the metadata at the station's lab, taken 3 days prior. Sarah's blood turned cold. She wasn't alone anymore. By morning, she packed what little she trusted: maps, analog compasses. A Knifian drove 6 hours west, far from Green Hollow. Her goal, the original training center at Cedar Falls, where the old instructors had taught the first rules decades ago. There, she found Captain Roy Carter, retired for years, but he recognized her immediately. "You saw them, didn't you?" he asked. Sarah just nodded. Carter sat her down and told her what no one had dared say officially. The rules weren't designed to protect missing people. They were designed to protect rescuers from the missing. According to Carter, somewhere deep in the Appalachians, there's something that copies people. Not perfectly, enough to fool the desperate. It begins with names. If it learns your name, it can shape what you see, what you hear. It shows you who you want to save. And once you follow, you're gone. Sarah asked what the photos meant. Carter said, "It's learning faster." "What do I do?" "Simple," Carter said. "Stop answering." But Sarah couldn't, because that same night, her personal phone lit up with a text from Mason. "Sarah, please help me." Her hands shook. She called the number. A voice answered. Not Mason, something else imitating his tone, but wrong. And then it said her full name. Not just Sarah Thompson. It used her middle name too. She hung up, but it had learned. In missing persons cases, strange evidence often surfaces. Unexplained photos, missing person sightings far from the search area, or sudden reappearances with no memory. Law enforcement explains these as human error, but some SAR teams believe certain mountains are listening, that names are dangerous. Names carry power. In every culture, every language, names define identity. But when facing the unknown, sometimes your name becomes the weakness. Think carefully who you let call you and what you respond to. For 3 days after the phone call, Sarah didn't sleep. Everywhere she went, she felt watched. It wasn't paranoia, it was certainty. In her apartment, her reflection lagged again. Her shadow sometimes didn't stretch in the right direction. Worst of all, she heard her name whispered in the silence between radio static. In the mirror, sometimes she caught glimpses of her own face smiling when she wasn't. She decided it was time to end it. She returned to Green Hollow one final time. No team, no backup. Her goal wasn't to search. She intended to burn the entire perimeter near Widow's Ridge-controlled fires, destroying whatever trace of herself remained there. That was the plan. But when she reached the old ranger station, someone was waiting. John Myers. Not the real John. She knew that. He'd been gone too long. But there he was, standing beside her abandoned truck, soaked with river water, his eyes glassy. "Don't answer," Sarah whispered to herself. But he didn't speak. Instead, he began walking toward the woods. Sarah followed. She knew she shouldn't. She followed anyway. Each step deeper into the Appalachian forest felt like a mistake she couldn't stop making. John's figure ahead blurred slightly with each movement, as if something was wearing him like a mask, but couldn't get the fit quite right. After 20 minutes, he stopped at the edge of a clearing and vanished. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. In the clearing stood 15 people, all identical, all copies of Sarah herself. Different ages, different uniforms, one in her childhood clothes, one in her training gear, one as she looked now. Each one smiled at her. Then they spoke in unison. "You followed." Sarah stumbled backward. Her mind felt like glass about to shatter. This was what John had described, what Travis had warned about. She'd followed herself. And now they had her. Her voice cracked. "What do you want?" The copies didn't speak. Instead, they began to move slow, synchronized steps forward toward her. Sarah turned and ran. Branches tore at her skin. Mud splashed her face. The forest around her shifted wrong, the trees leaning inward, guiding her. She couldn't tell how long she ran, minutes, hours, days. Eventually, she collapsed. When she opened her eyes, she was at the edge of Widow's Ridge. Alone. But she knew she wasn't alone anymore. Something had followed her back. In psychology, there's a phenomenon called the doppelganger effect. Seeing yourself in dreams, hallucinations, or even during near-death experiences. Some cultures view it as an omen of death. In missing persons lore, reports occasionally surface of searchers claiming to see copies of themselves or being called by people who look just like them. Though rarely publicized, these stories persist especially from teams operating deep in forests or mountain ranges. When you chase yourself, you lose. Not every path forward is meant to be followed. In life, like in the forest, recognizing when you're walking into a trap is the difference between survival and being lost forever. Sarah didn't file a report. She knew nobody would believe her. She barely believed herself. She spent the next 3 days inside her apartment, lights on 24/7s, mirrors covered, windows locked. She counted herself constantly. Every time she saw her reflection accidental or otherwise-ish, whispered, "One, just one." But sometimes, in the corner of her eye, she wasn't sure. Then came the knock on the door. At 2:47 a.m., she ignored it. But after 30 minutes, she heard a voice. "Captain Sarah Thompson, Search and Rescue Command. This is Officer Paul Jenkins. Open up." Jenkins was a real officer. She knew him, but she also knew the rules. Don't respond to voices without visual confirmation. She waited, and then her phone buzzed. Text from Jenkins' number. "Sarah, I'm at your door. Open up, please." She texted back. "Prove it." No reply. When morning came, Sarah checked the station records. Jenkins had been missing for 5 days. The system still marked him as lost in field. He never made it back. She realized it wasn't trying to mimic strangers anymore. It was using people she trusted. Sarah decided there was only one way to end this. She returned to Widow's Ridge with a single goal: find the epicenter, find where the rules came from, and end it. Equipped with a single flare gun, analog maps, and no digital trackers, she hiked deep into the restricted zones places not even the station maps marked anymore. 3 days in, she found something she wasn't supposed to: a clearing of broken trees. In the center, a pit. Not natural, not old. The earth was peeled back like skin. Around the edge of the pit stood silhouettes. They weren't moving. They weren't alive. They were placeholders. Shapes of people who hadn't yet arrived. Sarah understood then. Every person who vanished didn't die. They became something waiting to be called. And the pit itself pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. She aimed the flare gun and fired. Nothing happened. No fire. No explosion. The flare vanished mid-air. Swallowed. Behind her, the shadows turned. They knew she was there now. Sarah ran. She never returned to the station. Some say she disappeared near Cold Hollow River. Others claim hikers still hear her voice calling for help, echoing from Widow's Ridge long after sunset. But those who know the rules, they don't answer. Not anymore. Some mountain rescue teams across America have unofficial no-search zones, places where too many SAR personnel disappeared, where compasses spin, radios fail, and shadows don't behave. These areas are omitted from public maps, only passed down through whispers. In life, trust is earned, but even trust has limits. When something familiar tries too hard to be trusted, question it. Not every knock deserves an open door. Some calls should never be answered. Sarah Thompson's disappearance didn't stop the calls. In the months that followed, more hikers went missing near Widow's Ridge, and the remaining rescue teams refused to answer their radios after sundown. They knew what those voices were. At headquarters, the few who stayed rewrote the rules. Don't search at night. Don't work alone. Never respond to your name after dark. But one rescuer, Eli Daniels, didn't believe. Fresh out of training, stubborn, and eager to prove himself, Eli thought the old stories were superstition. So when a call came in, one rainy night reports of a child's cries echoing near Cold Hollow River, Eli ignored the rules and went alone. He didn't return. The team found his radio still transmitting. The last recording sent chills down every veteran's spine. The voice on the radio wasn't Eli. It was Sarah, begging for help. But Sarah was gone. In the weeks after, more oddities happened. Reflections in station windows showing faces no longer alive. Radios turning on by themselves at midnight. Reports from hikers claiming to see search and rescue teams moving through the woods when none had been dispatched. Eventually, the entire station shut down. Widow's Ridge, Cold Hollow, and Dead Man's Trail were officially closed. Unofficially, everyone knew why. Today, if you hike near those parts of Appalachia, you'll find rusted rescue signs pointing nowhere. footprints ending at riverbanks, and sometimes, after sunset, you'll hear a familiar voice calling your name. Locals have advice: don't respond, because if you do, you'll join them, and then you'll be the one calling. Across Appalachia, countless trails are unofficially blacklisted by SAR teams. Lost hikers report hearing their own names whispered in the woods and seeing missing people silently watching from tree lines. Rangers explain it as fear or exhaustion, but too many veterans leave the job early, refusing to speak about why. Some paths aren't meant to be walked. Some voices aren't meant to be answered. Whether in life or in the dark, remember, familiarity can be a trap. Years after the station closed, the stories didn't stop. Hikers still disappeared. Search efforts still failed. But technology changed. People carried smartphones, GPS trackers, wireless earbuds, and the voices adapted. Caleb Jenkins was a podcastera skeptic. He thought the missing persons cases around Widow's Ridge were myths, old local legends wrapped in modern fear. So, in the summer of 2024, he did what skeptics do. He went looking for proof. He hiked Widow's Ridge alone, GoPro on his chest, broadcasting live to his subscribers. For 2 hours, nothing happened. But then Caleb's audience heard something he didn't. A second voice in his stream, saying his name. At first it whispered, then it repeated louder. Thousands of live viewers begged him in the chat to stop, to leave, to listen. He didn't. He kept walking. The chat watched helplessly as Caleb's signal stuttered. His breathing grew uneven, and the last thing anyone heard before the feed cut to black was Caleb saying, softly, "I hear you." His body was never found. But months later, hikers near Widow's Ridge found something worse. They heard Caleb's podcast, playing softly from deep in the woods. No device, no source, just his voice, repeating, calling. Even in modern search missions, radio and phone interference remains a documented hazard in remote forests. Strange audio phenomena are dismissed as signal bounce or atmospheric anomalies. But Appalachian SAR teams increasingly report lost hikers claiming to hear modern sounds ringing phones, familiar music deep where no signal exists. Technology can't protect you from everything. Sometimes, the more connected you are, the more vulnerable you become. Not every voice through your headphones is real. No one works rescue near Widow's Ridge anymore. The station is overgrown, windows broken, radios silent. Locals avoid the place, but occasionally, trespassers still wander too close. And sometimes, they come back changed. Detective Maria Ellis didn't believe that. She was sent to investigate a missing hiker's case, a simple file, a simple report, but when she questioned survivors, their answers didn't fit reality. One man, eyes hollow, claimed he'd seen himself leading the rescue. Another woman said she watched her husband walk into the woods after a voice whispered her childhood nickname. Maria dug deeper. Interviews led her to stories older than the ranger station. Stories about the ones who call shadows that wear familiar faces. Voices that only need you to answer once. By the time Maria realized the stories weren't myths, she'd broken every rule. She worked alone. She searched at night. And worst of all, she responded when her mother's voice said her name. Now, people say they still see Maria in the woods. Her patrol car abandoned. Her badge lying in the mud. And at night, if you're near Widow's Ridge, you might hear her calling. But it's not Maria anymore. Not really. So the locals teach a final rule. Never answer a voice that knows your name, because the moment you do, you've already been found. Across regions like Appalachia, countless missing persons reports remain unsolved. While most are explained by terrain and human error, SAR veterans consistently warn new trainees. When something familiar calls from the woods, don't follow. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. In life, as in the deep forest, knowing when not to respond might be the choice that saves you. Widow's Ridge isn't cursed. That's what the old maps say. And that's why most people believe the stories are exaggerated. But deep under those mountains, there's something older than any map. Something patient. The Appalachian forests aren't empty. They're waiting. When the first settlers came through the mountains, they spoke of hearing their dead, voices calling from behind trees, using names no one should have known. Families disappeared overnight, cabins abandoned, and only one rule survived those early years: never follow a voice after sunset. What's in those woods doesn't want food. It doesn't want shelter. It wants your identity. It needs you to answer so it can become you. Every missing hiker, every lost rescuer, every unexplained shadow people glimpse at the edge of the tree line. They're not ghosts. They're failed copies. Things still trying to fit into the shape they stole. And the more people respond, the better it gets. The smarter, the faster. And now, thanks to radios, phones, and live streams, it doesn't even need to be near you to start calling. All it needs is your name and your attention. Throughout Appalachian history, folklore tells of copy spirits, mimics, and the taken beings that lure victims using familiar faces or voices. While modern science dismisses this as superstition, many search and rescue teams refuse to operate in certain zones after dark, not because of terrain, but because of what might call them. Protect your identity not just online, but everywhere. In life, there will always be something or someone trying to pull you off the right path using your weaknesses. Be careful who you listen to. In late 2025 months, after Widow's Ridge was officially closed, something new began happening. The voices calling hikers no longer sounded wrong. They no longer whispered. They spoke clearly, in perfect tone, with perfect timing. They called out rescue protocols, radio codes, even exact phrases only trained responders used. The copies had learned. Surveillance drones near Dead Man's Trail picked up something worse. Entire rescue teams, fully uniformed, moving in perfect formation through the woods. But there were no missions, no orders, no teams dispatched. Locals watched from distant hillsides as these imitation crews walked endless loops through the trees, never eating, never resting, never speaking, just marching. Command marked the sightings as hallucinations caused by stress, but veterans knew better. At night, they heard footsteps passing their cabins. Sometimes they found muddy boot prints under their windows from teams that didn't exist. That's when SAR officially abandoned the region, because the thing in those woods wasn't mimicking individuals anymore. It was mimicking entire teams, and it had learned patience. Now it waits, because someday someone new will come to Widow's Ridge, someone who doesn't know the rules. And when they do, the copies will be ready. In modern search operations, it's rare, but not unheard of for teams to report seeing other rescuers in restricted zones. Official reports attribute this to exhaustion or environmental illusions. But the pattern is clear. Missing persons increase after these sightings. In life, as in the wilderness, not everything moving with confidence knows where it's going. Some paths are designed to mislead you. Always verify who you're following. Years passed. Widow's Ridge vanished from maps. The rescue station crumbled to ruin, and the forest claimed everything in silence. But silence isn't safety. In early spring of 2030, a new ranger, Unit Young, untrained, was assigned to survey the area. They had no knowledge of the rules, no reason to fear the woods. They went in. 2 days later, only one of them came back. His report didn't make sense. He said his team wasn't dead, they were walking. He said they kept moving past him, never blinking, never slowing, marching toward a voice he couldn't hear. His final words before collapsing, "I think," they answered. Command buried the incident. No rescue was authorized. No official record made. The region is now marked as permanently closed. But at night, the old radios in neighboring counties still pick up calls. Simple, official-sounding transmissions. Coordinates. Rescue codes. Voices asking for backup. Voices using names of people long dead. Some young responders, eager and naive, answer those calls. And the moment they do, the copies know. They're listening, they're waiting, and every time someone answers, the forest grows smarter. Now, it doesn't need you to come to it. One day, it will come for you. The rules didn't save us. The silence only delayed it. So when your phone rings in the dead of night, or when your radio crackles unexpectedly, or when you hear a loved one call your name from behind a closed door, remember the final rule. Never answer. Not even once. Because answering is how it begins. And no one escapes after answering. Throughout history, human fear has always centered around the unknown. But the most dangerous threats aren't those hidden in shadows. They're the ones that sound like a friend. Not every voice deserves your trust. In life and in the darkness, discernment isn't paranoia, it's survival.